there. Once again, I am Kimberly HayDay Moving.
And as always, I'm Amanda Day.
And you're listening to the Fundraising HayDay podcast,
where we cover the how-tos of grants and fundraising.
And how we can all do a better job of changing the world through philanthropy.
And our Patreon subscribers get these episodes early.
That's right. So listen, y'all, the HayDay Services, that's me, that's Amanda, that's us. We have a few dates available toward the end of 2025. And this is being recorded in May of 2025 for your reference. If you need keynote speakers or you want some fun folks who know their business to come and train your people, your partner agencies, your members. We have spoken a lot at conferences. We've done lots of training virtually, in person. And if you're looking ahead to 2026, come on and talk to us because we're booking into 2026 as well. If you are an avid listener of this podcast, guess what? We train, coach, and speak just like we sound on the podcast. We don't use as many cheesy sound effects. I think maybe that's the dividing line. But other than that, we'd love to work with you. And you can reach out to us. You can check us out on our website, haydayservices.com, or you can drop us an email at hello@haydayservices.com. That's HAYDAY services.com.
Yep, that's right. We love to tailor our presentations to meet the needs of your organization and audience, and we can deliver educational and engaging content for an hour, a half day, full day. That's one of the things we love is that we don't come with a prepackaged thing. It's like we want to meet the needs of your organization. So we're always happy to chat with you about what your needs are.
And again, it's hello@haydayservices.com if you want to reach out to us. So after a quick word from our sponsor, the wonderful Kim Joyce and Associates, we are going to be sharing an incredible interview with Vanessa Priya Daniel, author of Unrig the Game, What Women of Color Can Teach Everyone About Winning. You're going to want to listen to this. Stay tuned.
It's so good.
We are thrilled that S&F Writing Solutions is our podcast sponsor for the second half of season 8. Also, season 8, what? Wow. So founder and CEO Stacy Fitzsimmons holds a Master's of Business Administration where her thesis focused on strategic planning and culture change. Combined with her 20 plus years of experience as a project management and grant professional, with a federal grant win rate of 70%, she has learned more than a thing or two about leadership, consulting, and taking calculated risks. So take a listen. So Stacy, I know you're a big proponent of leadership at all levels, no matter the title, the job title, right? What does that look like in an organization?
So I'm gonna pull a quote here, and I know you guys are probably gonna roll your eyes, but one of my favorite authors is John Maxwell, and he defines leadership, and he says that leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And so when we approach leadership that way, and we're not talking about influence in like a naughty, nasty, like unethical way here. We're just talking about how do you promote other people and yourself in a way that gets things done. And so when you take it from that mindset, we all have things that we need to get done. Mm-hmm. So how can we shape our environment and the way that we look at things so that we can get those things done? And so it's in that way that we have to assert our own influence, mm-hmm. that we then can actually take action, get others to take action with us. And as grant professionals, there's nothing we need more than for people to take action, whether it's getting us information, whether it's implementing the programs, if it's collecting the data, we need people to take action. So it's really how can we best serve others and making sure that they get their work done so that we can get our work done too. And I think that's all done through a focus of not only influence, but servant leadership as well. How can I help you help me? And in that way, it really is everybody's responsibility to be a leader within an organization. It's just a matter of how can you, in your particular position, assert the influence that you are given by your position.
Nicely put and thought-provoking as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
To find out more about Stacy Fitzsimmons, SNF Writing Solutions, and her incredible offerings, visit snfwritingsolutions.com.
So I want to give what is an incredibly impressive intro. Not that I am incredibly impressive delivering it. I'm talking about the accomplishments of our guest today. So Vanessa Priya Daniel has worked in social justice movements for 25 years as a labor and community organizer, writer, researcher, and funder. She is the founder of Groundswell Fund, so that's a 501c3, and Groundswell Action Fund, which is a 501c4, two leading funders of organizations led by women of color and transgender people. Under her leadership, Groundswell moved over $100 million with an M dollars to grassroots organizations led by women of color and used a breakthrough philanthropic model that featured supermajorities of women of color, movement leaders, and former grassroots organizers on its staff and board of directors. Vanessa was featured in the Chronicle of Philanthropy as one of 15 influencers who are changing the nonprofit world, and named by Inside Philanthropy as one of their top 100 most powerful players in philanthropy. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, among many other publications, and I'm going to be cheesy here for a moment, her book, Unrig the Game, What Women of Color Can Teach Everyone About Winning, was published by Random House March 4th, 2025. And Amanda and I got to hear her when she stopped in Atlanta at a beloved local bookstore. We're just thrilled to have you. Welcome to Fundraising HayDay, Vanessa.
Thanks so much for such a lovely, gracious introduction. And it's great to be here with you all.
We're excited to have you here. Before we start talking about your fabulous book, we always love to hear our guests' origin story about how they got into the world of nonprofits, because most 8-year-olds don't really say, I want to work in the nonprofit field, Mom. So we'd love to hear how you got into this field.
Yeah, well, I grew up as a queer, mixed race, half Sri Lankan, half white kid in Seattle, Washington in the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
And, that experience, I learned very early on that when you tell the truth and you do the brave thing to tell the truth about injustice, that there will be a lot of opposition, that there will be pain that you have to go through, but that ultimately people will stand with you and freedom is worth it. And I think I learned those just through a few pivotal experiences growing up. The first was telling the truth about sexual abuse from a family member when I was 5 years old, and then experiencing the Sri Lankan side of my family completely abandon me. That was very painful. Just that was the family that was my entire world. All my formative years had been spent in the loving embrace of that family, and just to give context, in Seattle, Washington, I didn't see another Sri Lankan person that wasn't a member of my family until I left home. So that there was just like no community there. So that was a big, big pivotal moment. And it was painful, but also my mother, who happened to be a white feminist, stood with me. And, it was hard, but freedom was worth it. I learned it again when I spoke up about the racism that I was experiencing in the predominantly white city of Seattle, Washington during that time, and found that, being raised by a single white mom who didn't have a lot of skills to help me through that, that speaking up was still good because Black women were who stepped in and were there for me and helped me learn how to survive this country as a girl of color. And then it happened when I came out as queer. I like most of us in this community, I lost people, but I found that other people stood with me. So I I really got that at a pretty early age that, freedom doesn't come easy. A lot of people will stand against you when you go for it. And but others are going to stand with you. And I really I think understood what Toni Morrison articulates it best when she says, when you get free, you have a responsibility to free somebody else.
Mhm.
And I was very interested in that from a young age. So I was raising funds and organizing, awareness about anti-apartheid from middle school. I was organizing for ethnic studies in high school. By the time I was in my early 20s, I was a community and a labor organizer, and then I was just, it's that's been my life calling is social justice work, and the nonprofit sector just happens to be in the space and time where a lot of that work is situated. So I've spent
Mhm.
a lot of time in that sector.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that amazing story. You went through so much in such a short period of time, and it completely makes sense, that transformation in a way that it gave you to move forward into the work that you're doing today. So thanks for sharing that. I would actually love, I'm looking at Amanda because, yeah, I'm getting ready to just go off the questions already. But we'd actually, all three of us had sort of talked about that before we started filming and recording. For a lot of folks who listen to Fundraising HayDay, we don't have big formal studies, but just when we're looking at user patterns, there are a lot of people that look like me and Amanda, right? And if you're just listening to this, where I would say I'm a white woman of a certain age, I can no longer say middle aged. I think Amanda could say she's middle aged. Um, and there are a lot of folks who are grant writers for local governments and nonprofits that, for all kinds of reasons, are white women. There's all kinds of history as to how that got started and perpetuated. And a lot of it has to just do with the racist foundations of this country and how it permeates and percolates through everything. But what Amanda and I are always looking for are ways to help people who look like us find ways to find that courage, because for a lot of white women, they have not had to exercise that muscle because they were not necessarily in situations where it was forced on them. And so what I'm hearing and what Amanda's heard, when the executive orders first started coming out in January, we did a couple of webinars, just hey, let's come together and here's where we are and what can we do together kind of thing. And I would hear, like, in the comments or people say to me, well, I just want to keep my head down for the next 4 years and it will be over. And that chapped me in the first Trump administration. And now I'm just like, yeah, say and do what you want. But if you say that to me, I'm just going to come back and say, that's a no. You don't, that's really not a great strategy. I'm not here for it. And so I would love for you to spend a few moments and walk us through that understanding that you had foisted upon you as a child, that lots of white women who are in our age bracket are maybe just now waking up to. I'm not saying it's a good thing that it took them so long. I'm just saying that's where we are. So yeah. What are ways that they can think of, let's get out of the not put your head down for 4 years kind of mentality? Because it's fairly pervasive still.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I would say is there are white women who are incredible beacons and examples of courage and backbone, both living and also throughout history. And so I really encourage people to think about what it is to if anyone's ever sang in a choir, or if you've ever been and understand the concept of like being in a space where a lot of folks are singing off key and you have to try to find the right note and sing on key. What you want to do is key off of people who are on the right note. And so when you're surrounded with this sort of cacophony of cowardice that is around many of us right now, as people are dealing with their fear, how do we identify and tune ourselves to the note of courage that certain people are on? So I think about a Jane Fonda, right? Jane Fonda, and if you read her life story, very interesting. She's affluent, came up as an affluent white woman, and she has repeatedly stuck her neck out, whether it was around the war in Vietnam, whether it was being in solidarity with the Black Panther Party and the civil rights struggle, and now the work she's doing for climate justice. Um, we can look at the Grimke sisters, look at the history. And I say over and over again to white folks who care about social change, the only thing that this country has worked to deep six more than the histories of people of color who resisted is the histories of white folks who stood in solidarity around class struggle, around racial justice, and around women's rights. And so I think rooting in those folks who really embodied a solidarity is helpful. And then understanding that really safety comes with courage. It's the danger that comes with cowardice. And we see this over and over again. And the moment we are in now should not be a surprise. Whenever there is a surge forward towards social justice in this country, there's always a huge backlash.
Mhm.
We saw it with, Jim Crow after emancipation. We saw it with COINTELPRO and mass incarceration following the passage of the Civil Rights Act and that movement. There's no conceivable way that we were going to have the largest, uprisings and social justice protest movement after the murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and not have this backlash. And what we have to learn is, and by the way, most people of color are not surprised by what's happening now. White people are far more shocked and surprised by what's happening now. But we have to remember and learn the lessons of the past, that the mistake we make in the moment of backlash is this feeling that the way through this is to keep our heads down and to make concessions. And after emancipation, the concessions like the Electoral College, like the exclusion of mostly Black agricultural and domestic workers from all labor protections, those type of concessions come back to haunt all of us of all races and genders in this country. The concessions after the civil rights movement of, the Democratic Party supporting mass incarceration. We've got the largest prison population in the world, supporting the assassination and incarceration in many times of Black organizers, of organizers of color. And I don't mean blanketly the Democratic Party supported that, but there was a tacit endorsement of this kind of war on crime and all of this incarceration that happened. So these things they end up hurting all of us. And we see like the assault on affirmative action. Affirmative action, the largest beneficiaries of that were white women.
Yeah.
And so the largest folks who are taken out by that and clotheslined by that are white women. Same thing with welfare reform. The specter of the Black woman welfare queen was used to gut welfare benefits, but who were the largest number of people receiving those benefits were actually poor white women in this country. So this I think white women have been sold a bill of goods that it is safer to keep your head down, to be polite, to not speak too loudly. And I think that we need to disabuse ourselves with that. Now, that doesn't mean we're not strategic, and that doesn't mean we're reckless, and that doesn't mean that everything we're doing needs to be broadcast from a loudspeaker, because we are now living under fascism in this country, and we need to follow the example of people who have survived that and who have organized in movements, globally under these kinds of regimes. And that means some things are going to be below the radar. But the center of gravity has to be courage. What are we doing that is the courageous and right thing, that is accountable to our communities, that is standing in solidarity with the most vulnerable instead of letting them be thrown under the bus, letting groups be picked off one by one, standing and locking arms together. And then how we do that, each one of us goes within our positions and our strategies and our souls to figure out what is the level of risk that we want to take so that we can show up and be able to, one day look ourselves and our grandkids in the mirror and be able to say, yeah, we're going to be good ancestors. We showed up.
Yeah.
Well,
So I don't want to stop talking, but I just want to just have a moment so that everybody can take that in, as you're listening. Thank you for that. And,
well, and I
Amanda,
especially appreciated the thought that not everything has to be out loud and on a megaphone. Like there are things you can do that aren't for the world over to hear, but still can make an impact within your community. Because I think that's what scares a lot of people off is they feel like they have to be at the center and in the forefront. And there are people that need to do that, but it takes a lot more behind the scenes to make things happen too. So
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding the difference between like being very courageous and brave and rigorous behind the scenes, the difference between that and stepping into the wall, like blending into the wallpaper and like letting people of
yeah,
color and frontline communities deal with it. You
mhm.
know, and sometimes under the guise of, oh, I don't want to step in front of anyone's leadership. So now I'm actually gonna not help. You know, I
yeah,
mean, there's a little bit of that. So it's like, yeah, listen to people. I think listening to the margins is important. I
mhm,
take a lot of cues from Black women, from trans women of color, because I know that there's things that they see that as a cisgender South Asian women I may miss. And so I can take guidance, I can support their leadership, I can have their backs, but that doesn't mean that not, I'm letting them do all the work, right? All of us can put our shoulder to the wheel.
Very true.
Are there, first of all, everyone should buy the book, Unrig the Game. Are there, examples that maybe a couple of examples in the work that you do in the book that you would like to pull out and highlight to sort of support some of the things that we just talked about? Some particular lessons?
Yeah, I mean, so I will say, and I worked in philanthropy and I ran a foundation for a while.
Mhm.
After the Trump was took office for the first time, um, I I penned a public sign-on letter that that really offered other foundations the opportunity to stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable communities. And I used the phrase white supremacy. And I said, we are under a white supremacist threat. And it was um, mainly white women who called me up or came and asked me to coffee and sat down and argued vigorously against my using that term. Now it seems bananas at this point, right? Because now it's like we're in Naziville now. But at that time, um, I was told that I was um, using a phrase that would alienate people. I was
Mm.
told that the language was too harsh. I was told that it was over dramatizing the situation. And, I, of course, didn't pay attention to that. But I will say that my foundation, which was a public foundation, we raised all the dollars we gave out every year. We lost grants behind my decision to use that phrase. And at the same time, there were white folks in other institutions that did step up and have my back, sometimes in invisible ways by signing onto the letter, by amplifying it, and some because they were in institutions that wouldn't allow them to do that, by in other ways that were under the radar, by moving money and replacing the money that we lost. And by support, like opening up the floodgates of their funding to communities of color, to groups that they knew were on the front lines and were going to receive the brunt of the attacks, to immigrants, which, as they are now, were being hauled out of their houses and fearing the knock on the door. So I think that like that moment, is just a microcosm of what we're up against in this moment. I apologize. Of what we're up against in this moment in terms of this decision point between, are we going to um, minimize what's happening and try to quiet down and keep people comfortable, or are we going to actually speak the truth and deal with what we need to deal with? And that is, I think there are many people making the right decision, but I think for folks who have a greater proximity to privilege and power, that proximity is in relationship to sometimes our ability to see clearly and tap into courage and solidarity. And so if we're cognizant of that, then we can actually mitigate it. And we can all do that. I know that I have more access to, I'm in a closer proximity to privilege by, oh, I'm sorry, this is just like a circus in here today. I'm close in proximity to privilege and power because I was raised middle class, because maybe I have like for folks who maybe in proximity to folks who may have a darker complexion than I do, because I'm South Asian, in comparison to someone who may be Black or Native and have faced different challenges in this country. So I think understanding that, and then, okay, with that knowledge, how do I use that privilege? How do I use those privileges and be cognizant that I'm going to need to really, really stay on top of maintaining my courage and backbone and solidarity?
Mm. That's a good segue. One of the things that Kimberly and I often talk about on Fundraising HayDay is that inequitable relationship between funders and grantees. And, thinking about you mentioning, because of what you said, some funders pulled their grants from you, which that's a choice, right? I'd love to hear more about how your foundation, Groundswell, worked to build better relationships between funders and grant recipients.
Sure. Well, Groundswell Fund is a foundation that I started and ran for 17 years. And, I think first off, there's never not going to be a power dynamic between funders and grantees.
For
So I
sure.
think we can just disabuse ourselves of that. And, philanthropy is when we achieve the world that we're all dreaming of, philanthropy won't exist in the same way because there won't be the kind of accumulation of wealth in the same way. And so there won't be the power dynamic in the same way.
True.
But we are in this particular stopgap that we're in now. And one of the things that mitigated that power dynamic for us is that we had supermajorities of former or current grassroots organizers, mostly women of color, on every level of kind of decision-making body that we had in the organization. So on the staff, on the board, on the executive committee of the board. And what that meant was that there was a very primary sense of accountability to delivering material change for the most vulnerable communities, because those were the communities that people lived in, that they worked in, that they had, most of their colleagues were in. These are the folks that they had to answer to about what we were doing. These are the people who we had to sit across from kitchen tables and look in the eye and be able to say honestly, your life is better because we existed. And that is very different from having decision-making power in the hands of millionaires and billionaires and, academics, or, high-level policy people, or even lawyers who may be more removed from the grassroots. And I think, all of those people from all of those different classes and sectors of work can play an incredible role. And we did have some of those folks on our board. But the difference was in our board meetings, it was really incredible to see, for example, a Latina organizer from, a predominantly Latino neighborhood and city, sit down and sit next to a more affluent white male donor advisor and say out loud, I wish we had more power to engage voters. And then to be able to hear from that advisor that, he's actually funded a lot of people of color in the environmental justice space that that have built all this voter engagement power over the last 10 years. And he doesn't know what it will look like for her organization, but would she like him to connect, make the
Right.
connections and he can talk to these folks? Because of his level of vantage point, he's been able to see people across the country from a bird's eye view and have all these relationships. It's a place where, a Black woman midwife sits down next to a white, cis woman who's a millionaire heiress. And, the heiress says, well, I'm really excited because I heard about these researchers at Harvard that are researching about the need for researching more about Black women maternal mortality and, documenting the problem. And for her to be able to hear from the midwife, well, that's great, but I don't think that's the first place we should prioritize putting resources because we already have a lot of research documenting that. And we
Yeah.
actually have some policies and things that we're working on that we're getting ready to move through state legislatures that will make midwifery and doula care that's culturally competent more accessible to people. And that's what our communities most need in this moment, not another research. And so those kinds of conversations in a context where there was a supermajority that really encouraged, even though we had, I think, wonderful donors and, people from these other walks of life that were not organizers who were very open. But I think um, the having the supermajority was an extra encouragement to really listen. So like that millionaire could actually really listen when that Black woman midwife said those things and could take that to heart. And I think that helped us a lot. The other thing that we did was some of the funds we ran, we actually had grassroots leaders recommend all of the grants.
Right.
And this is a longer conversation about how to do that in a way that doesn't end up being like a real drain on the time, like giving yet another job to people in the field who already have like 2 to 3 jobs from philanthropy between all the proposals and reports and
Mhm.
the site visits, everything else. But when it's a substantial amount of money, which this was in the millions, and you can figure out how to do it with a light touch on people's time, that can also be a way of directly putting the decision-making power in their hands.
Nice.
Yeah. I love that, the bringing of so many different people from walks of life together. Because I think that's part of too, finding your courage is, I can speak for me personally, growing up the way I did. I mean, I was Army brat, lived a lot of places, saw a lot of different cultures, but at the end of the day, closely surrounded with very like-minded people. And it's not, for me anyway, it was not until I started branching out more and talking to other people who had different walks of life and different experiences and thoughts and feelings on things than I did, that opened my eyes to think, to see things differently, right? So part of that finding my courage is being around other people that are courageous because they've lived it and understanding that and realizing that. I guess if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And you probably have a lot of great skills from that experience. Most folks I know who are Army brats, you get a kind of superpower around being able to adapt and talk to a lot of different kinds of people.
You either do that or you're kind of miserable, right? But
Yeah. Or you're alone at the lunchroom. Yeah.
yes, there is that. But again, just opening up to other ideas and experiences and things and realizing that the way you've always thought isn't always the right way to think or be. So,
Yeah, and that's the work right now. I mean, we are not going to get through this moment if we don't figure out a way to stand together across our differences.
mm,
And that is painful. There's an excellent piece called Coalition Politics by Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, the late great doctor who just passed, a civil rights icon. But it talks about, you know, this kind of solidarity that we need to build in this moment. It's painful being in these spaces. You're in spaces where people say things that trigger you. They don't understand your lived experience, your history. We have to have rigor about teaching each other, and we have to have a thick enough skin to know that we're in this not because we're here to get some comfortable utopia. We're in this uncomfortable experience because that's the way we save all of our lives. And reaching for each other and trying to have grace and also the rigor to educate each other and how we can show up for each other's communities is just absolutely critical. There's no way around that in this moment.
mm.
I think the biggest cognate to that in the grant seeking arena, which is where a lot of people who listen to us are coming from or work in, is so we're always talking about collaboration between agencies. I'm not even talking about between people, but between agencies. And there's always that discussion when Amanda and I are training. It's like, okay, so who collaborates? Everybody's like, we do, we do. And it's like, okay, who thinks they do a good job or who really likes it? And like nobody raises their hands or anything because it's so hard inviting even those discussions, even if it's two nonprofits that may have majority white leadership or something like that, even to come around the table. But we've been trying to foster those discussions more and more because that is going to be the way to survive moving forward, is to work together. As government funding is taken away, as then everyone who was getting a lot of government funding is like, okay, well, we'll just pivot to not private funding. I'm like, what could possibly go wrong, y'all? Sure, it'll be great, and so I think having those kinds of discussions and those kinds of thoughts among grant seekers and opening that up to also include, let's just work together, knowing that it will be a challenge, but knowing that it's like probably the best possible way to try and survive.
Yeah, survival skills. And that is, I mean, I think this book, why I feel like the title of this book is Unrig the Game, What Women of Color Can Teach Everyone About Winning, is there are a set of survival skills in here that speak to how we get through fascism. And they are overrepresented in many women of color leaders, although not every leader who's a woman of color has them. Not every leader who's not a woman of color lacks them. But things like boldness, really fighting for the fullness of what our communities need to thrive and what our planet needs to be livable. And, that is such an antidote to the affliction of timidity that fascists really rely on to get all of us to obey in advance and to put our heads down and comply. We see that boldness in Barbara Lee as the only no vote to the Iraq War. We see it in the sisters who fought like hell for the Green New Deal. It was Black, Latina, and Native and South Asian sisters who fought really, really hard for that. And Latina, I mean, it was very much women of color at the forefront of that also made sure that was included in the Infrastructure Reduction Act. Many of the things from the Green New Deal to support the most vulnerable communities as we deal with climate change. This kind of boldness that really, really helps us to show up in the way that we see like a Jasmine Crockett showing up, in the way we see an AOC showing up. That is what we need right now. The superpower of generosity, which is the conviction to fight in a way that doesn't leave the most vulnerable groups behind or throw anyone under the bus in order to win. It is that tenacity to say we're not going to leave pregnant people or our trans kids or immigrants or university students, anyone behind, in order to with this illusion that we're going to win somehow for a smaller group. And that conviction to stand in solidarity is absolutely a survival tool in this moment. And then the third one I talk about is 360 vision, which is tackling the forces of patriarchy, white supremacy, and extractive capitalism and colonialism, not one by one, but simultaneously. And I think if anyone and I don't know if you all have been out to some of the hands-off rallies or just like any of the protests that we're seeing now, the signage for one thing is just like giving me so much life because it's so creative. Like everyone's made their own signs. I saw a sign that said it's so bad even the introverts came out. But like the other thing about the signs is that there's so many issues. People are talking about the human rights of people in Gaza. They're talking about climate justice. They're talking about the rights of workers. They're talking about immigrant rights. Trans justice and rights. So all of these things are coming together as my colleague Maurice Mitchell says, when you do this strategy that they're using right now, which is flood the zone, which is to everything everywhere all at once to kind of overwhelm people. What you also get is you're hitting a lot of people at the same time. And so that means that there is an opportunity there for solidarity, and there's an opportunity for us to connect the dots in the way that many women of color have been doing for years around our issues. And that is when we become the most powerful. And if we notice, that's also when they killed Dr. King.
Yeah.
It was not after the March on Washington, which was important, but it was after with the planning of the Poor People's March on Washington that was bringing together in fierce solidarity white working class and poor folks with people of color
Mhm.
and saying, you're not going to sell us that bill of goods anymore, that we're going to scapegoat each other for each other's problems while the billionaires take it to the bank, that we're not going to do that. And so these kind of survival tools are, and how to use them, are just present in a powerful way in this book and in the voices of the more than 45 women of color leaders that I had the incredible privilege of interviewing, their stories, their tactics, their strategies that can help all of us.
Yeah, I loved all of when y'all are reading the book, you'll see there's several like little caveats, like little stories within the story of like a pro tip here, a great life lesson. And I loved hearing from the voices of all those that you interviewed. That was very neat. So, in fact, one other thing, and I'm going to read this so I get it right. One of the things I love about in the book is you call out the need for the energy, fire, and radical imagination of the young to push us further along the arc towards justice. But you also point out some of the differences between work ethic, boundaries, and expectations of younger and older generations. And so I'd love to dive into that more. 'Cause I love that you were showing both sides. Like, this is what the youth bring, but this is also what they're bringing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that every single generation pushes the next one, and that's always the way it should be.
Yeah.
And one of the people that I sat down with when I was writing the book was my sets of people was my elders, movement elders, Adisa Douglas, who's my mentor, and her late partner, Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan. I sat down with Dolores Huerta. Like they all told stories of being young people,
Uh-huh.
right? And of their elders saying, what do you mean you're gonna go in a sit-in or in a protest? You're the first one to go to college in our family. Or like, what are you thinking going up against agribusiness? Like, we're trying to keep our heads down and not get hurt. So I think, every generation pushes the next, and that's the way it should be. And the current generation is pushing all of us, and I'm 47 years old, but I feel so liberated by the work that that millennials and Gen Zers are doing around busting the gender binary, around getting out of the culture of martyrdom that has caused a lot of activists to die early and get sick. Um, around the creative use of culture and media and all of these new platforms. So there's so much that's good that we need to listen to. And every generation has also needed elders to help provide some guidance.
Yes.
And I will say that, there's the expression, anyone can have kids, but not everyone raises them. My movement elders raised me. And when you raise somebody, that's not just all compliments and praise and gold stars. That includes, yes, they deeply listen to my ideas, but it also includes sometimes it's correction, sometimes it is challenging your thinking and ideas, sometimes it is a boundary and setting a limit. And I think that what I was provided by my elders, which were not only kind of the tough love in combination with the encouragement, but also the political education, the understanding of how to strategize, of how to do the work. There's a lot of that, and I'll take some responsibility as well. I feel like my generation has not fully passed down to younger generations, and I think we need to step into that more.
Yeah.
With the feedback, and this comment encapsulates it for me. I talked to a middle-aged leader who said, I really stop and think carefully before I give a 25-year-old some feedback that I know they really need to hear to become stronger in their work. Because I stop and think about what it will do to me if they light me up online and try to destroy my whole reputation.
Oh, wow.
Happening, right? And so there's this sense where, I was a young whippersnapper once. I'm sure I said disrespectful things, but it's like it was in the context of maybe I said something that wasn't right to an elder in a board meeting or something, like in a
Right.
room. Now it's like people are saying it and it's echoing across the planet,
Yeah.
and so there is a fear there, but I think that we have to figure out ways of moving through that and giving the feedback anyway. And young people deserve it, they need it. And when we don't do it, it becomes very corrosive. Some of the things that people need feedback on become very corrosive. And every generation has its strengths and has its weaknesses. And I think that right now, what a lot of young people are up against is being raised in a time of COVID. There's a lot of isolation, been a lot of isolation. There's a lot of the influence of social media, which is a lot about selfie culture. It's highly narcissistic, it's highly individualistic, it's pumping people full of neoliberal ideas constantly that they don't necessarily recognize. And so some of these dynamics where, I had a someone come in my office and say, well, like a few weeks into the job, say, well, you know, I need to change my title because my life coach has told me it's not good for my brand. It's like these are not sentences that would have been uttered
No, no,
the context, because there's a way in which it does become about your brand, your experience, your comfort in the workplace, what you're getting and extracting from your workplace, more so than what we are here to do, the mission of the work. And that to me is like, that's where we get into a problem. We absolutely need to improve workplace conditions. I'm in support of unionization for anyone who wants a union. I was a union organizer for years, all of these things. But we also need to draw limits and say no to behavior that is taking us off track with the mission. Because at the end of the day, our responsibility is to deliver for the most vulnerable communities. We want to be humane and fair in our workplaces in the process, but our experience of having a utopian experience at work is not the moral of the story. Not by a long shot, not on a good day, much less when it's this serious outside. So we need to get that. And I think some of the infighting, some of the dragging, the nastiness that we see on social media, it's not just young people by any stretch, but I think that there's a culture around this, folks who really, really have only grown up in the social media age that needs to be checked and addressed and challenged.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember the analogy you used. You were touching on this at the book tour stop at Karis, and it was about was it about being a firefighter and then saying that
Yes. Yeah. I said, yeah. I mean, part of this is like we've overcorrected. So, no, and we have to acknowledge that in the nonprofit sector, we've kind of entered bizarroville for what we are allowing. There is very few other sectors, maybe with the exception of politics now, because it's a hot mess, it's the mess that it is. But you can't picture a fire department hiring someone, and then once they're hired as a firefighter, they say, well, now that I'm here, I really want to be in the calendar. I love ringing that little bell on the truck, but hot things, they trigger me. So you're going to have to really accommodate around that. I mean, that would never fly. And so we need to be real about the fact that some people need to make a decision. I need to make a grown-up decision about whether this is the right place for them. And, movement organizations, they are not Nordstrom. We are fighting forces that are literally trying to kill us and our people. So if people don't have the stomach for that, doesn't mean that the workplace has to be completely unsustainable and grind you to dust. That's not what I'm saying. Workplaces can be just and humane, but you cannot be, this thin-skinned and have this much fragility and be in this work. You just can't. And And I think that this overcorrection, um, to think that, any positional power is abuse, any rigor is oppression, any discomfort is being harmed, is just a lot of nonsense. It's making us unstrategic. It's making us lose our impact. And we need to be done with it. And we need to be clear with it. And, that means that some people may need to get moved out of movement organizations that are not in a place to do this work.
Fair.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy too. So I'd love to wrap with a question that aligns with the final chapter of the book. You share your hope of women of color in leadership, embracing 5 pieces of advice, and I loved all of these. So they are: trust yourself, build your squad, protect yourself, shine your light fully and unapologetically, and know that you are enough. I know we don't have time to delve into all of those, but I'd love to hear maybe you talking about one or two of those and how you can implement that way of thinking and living.
Yeah. Well, I will start with the protect yourself. So many of the leaders I talked to protected everybody else and the organization and not themselves. And what I want to say to leaders is you have not only a right, but a responsibility to protect yourself. And that is related to protecting the mission of the work.
Mm.
And I'm not saying this as in protect your right to be a dysfunctional leader or to not ever receive any feedback. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this: there are very few women of color leaders who I've ever encountered who have made a serious impact in the world for good and who have been in the game for any length of time, who have not had someone try to take them out.
Mm.
And the ones who have been the most successful at navigating those difficult moments are the ones who told me with absolute clarity, I don't care how skilled someone is technically at any particular job, if that person doesn't have qualities of backbone, courage, integrity, primary accountability to the vulnerable communities we're serving and trying to uplift, the willingness to do the hard thing that is right and not just the popular thing that is wrong and that it feels easy. If they don't have those qualities, I don't let them anywhere near my leadership team. And I think this is critically, critically important in these times. It is not about having yes people. These sisters were surrounded with folks who were critical thinkers, who would challenge them head on around strategy in productive ways, but they had the same North Star and they were willing to do the brave thing. We cannot have people in the bunker with us in this moment who are going to, you know, stab us in the back because they are afraid. And so this entire time in this country is about how we walk with our fear. We need to find people who have skill to walk with it that are around us. So I would encourage people to do that. The second piece about shining your light, and this is, of course, gets at the really fundamental reckoning that we need to do as women and as women of color with power and with the discomfort around power, both the discomfort that society is conditioned into to have when they see us in our power, and the discomfort we have internalized about ourselves standing in our power. And I think there is a lesson in so many of the stories of this book when we look at an Ai-jen Poo and the historic wins that standing in her power and being bold and shining her full light has allowed this country to win for domestic workers and all the people who rely on them to care for our kids and our elders. When we see, there's so many victories that we've won, including the being able to at least have a break, a 4-year break from Trump, which was brought to us by women of color who really stood in their power and fought like hell. So I think reckoning with that discomfort and really, really allowing it to be other people's problem and not yours. This discomfort around power, letting go of it and just going for it. We need people to just be moving forward on 4 cylinders, all pistons firing at this time. And when we see that, that's when we see a lot of the amazing wins throughout history, and the wins that we're seeing right now is when people are doing that. And there's a lesson there for all of us.
Thank you so much. This has been, and thank you for just sort of free range conversing with us. It is kind of our MO. So I really appreciate it. And I want to encourage everyone to pick up a copy of Unrig the Game. And if people want to learn more about what you're doing now or what you might be coming up for you, what's the best way for them to reach out and find you?
VanessaPriyaDaniel.com, and then that same name at all on all the socials, Vanessa Priya Daniel.
Great. Well, thanks so much. We really appreciate it. And best wishes for more successes in everything you do.
Great. Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks again to today's sponsor, S&F Writing Solutions. If you want to learn more about all that Stacy and her team offers in terms of resources, coaching, and writing services, visit their website at snfwritingsolutions.com.
Listen, y'all, thanks a lot. Thanks a ton, a crap ton, mucho tonnage for joining us today. I hope that you were as educated and inspired by our interview. I hope you pick up the book. It was just an amazing conversation. And as always, I'm just deeply grateful for this amazing community that's coming together around this. So again, thanks for listening, and you are appreciated.
You really are. We're so honored you choose to spend time with us week after week. We hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks where we're sharing a how-to episode. We're going to be talking about where to find data when you're writing your need statement. So we'll see you then, folks.
See ya.